Greetings, everyone. For this video and lesson today, you're going to need your Unit 6 review worksheet. We're going to do an example of each type of solving of a system in preparation for our test tomorrow. Please be respectful in my absence. Make sure you sit in your assigned seats. When it is work time, you are not allowed to leave the room. I'd like you to stay in the classroom. And make sure that you study in preparation for that test tomorrow. Let's start off by looking at number 2. The first section is solving system of equations by graphing. If you need to review your steps, make sure you have your foldable out. Our first step is to get y by itself because we want our equations to be in y equals mx plus b form. So I'm going to start off with my first equation. I'm going to subtract x from both sides. Then I'll divide every single term by 3. And I end up with y is equal to negative 1/3 x minus 1. Let's do the same for the second equation. We want to start off by getting y by itself. So I'm going to subtract the 3x from both sides. I end up with a negative 3x minus 9. Divide every single term by 9. Now we have y equals negative, and instead of 3/9, you always reduce fractions. Now as we take a look and compare these two lines, you'll notice they're exactly the same. So I can actually already answer if I have a line over itself, then their intersection point is always. So we would say infinite solutions. Now I still want you to graph the line to show where they would cross or overlap. So I'm going to start down at -1. Our rise is -1, our run is 3. Rise -1, run 3, rise -1, run 3. Make sure you fill up that entire graph as always. It's equals to, so it's a solid line. Now if I was to graph the second line, it would be right over top, so I don't have to graph over top of what I already have. So remember, when solving by graphing, your solutions can be a point of intersection, infinite solutions, or if they never cross, meaning if they're parallel, you could have no solutions. Let's jump down to number 5 and do an example of substitution. If you need to review your steps for substitution, you'll want to have your foldable out. That's a great way to study, is to go over that foldable and work out those examples. My first goal with substitution is to get a variable by itself. It really doesn't matter which variable, I just have to pick one. So I'm actually going to get this y value by itself up top. So to do that, I'm going to start by subtracting 6x from both sides. Then I'm going to divide every single term by -4. And I end up with y equals -6 over -4 reduces down to +3/2x. Then we have a positive divided by a negative, so I know I'm going to have a negative, so you can leave it as subtraction or adding a negative. And 54 fourths reduces down to, let's see, if you use your calculator, you'd get 13.5. If you leave it as an improper fraction, you'd have 27/2. So you just have to decide how you want to write that in your work. I know we have some fractions. That's okay. We've had fractions in our work in the past. Step 2 is to take my expression and I'm going to substitute it into the other equation for my y value because it's y is by itself. So I'm going to rewrite the other equation, but where there's a y, I'm going to have a gap. Where that gap is, is where my expression goes. I'm substituting it in. Okay. Step 3 is to solve for that variable. So you'll look, I only have x in there. So first I'm going to distribute. If I have 2 over 1, I'm going to put it over 1, times 3 over 2, I end up with 6 over 2, or just 3. If I have 2 over 1 times negative 27 over 2, I actually end up with negative 27. So even though we had those crazy fractions, they actually took care of themselves. A couple options here. I'm going to add 27 to the other side first. So I'm left with a negative 9x plus 3x equals, if you need your calculator, make sure you have your calculator for the test tomorrow. And if you need one, they are on the cell phone jail. So make sure you pick one up if you need one. So we're going to be at a negative 42. I'm going to combine like terms. They're on the same side, so all I have to do is combine them. I have a negative 6x. I want to divide both sides by that negative 6. A negative divided by a negative is a positive, and I end up with positive 7. The last step, I have x by itself. I need to find y. I can pick either equation. I'm going to choose the first one just because they're slightly smaller numbers. And wherever there's an x, I'm going to put a gap. And wherever that gap is, I'm going to put in my 7. So let's take a look and let's solve for our y variable now. I'm going to start off by multiplying, take care of my parentheses. I'm going to subtract 42 to both sides. I'm going to divide both sides by negative 4. And I end up with y equals a negative 3. Is this how I keep my answer? You know, if you do on a test, you'd lose just 1 point because I want to see that final answer written in coordinate form. So 7, negative 3 for that answer. Remember, in substitution, you can have a coordinate point for an answer. You can have infinite solutions if it's, let's say, 5 equals 5. Or you can have no solution if you end up with something like 5 equals 0. All right, let's turn the page and take a look at number 10. We're going to solve using elimination. So in this case, my first step is to line them up. And I kind of gave you ones that were all lined up, so that makes it pretty easy. Next, I want to choose a variable to eliminate. I'm going to choose the y's because they're smaller numbers. To eliminate the y's, I'm going to have to multiply this first equation by a negative 3. If I do that, I distribute and end up with, let me try that again, a negative 15x, a negative 3y, and a negative 45. Let's bring over our other equation to line it up underneath. Old school adding, draw a line underneath and add. Negative 15x plus 15x cancels to 0. Negative 3 plus 3 is also 0. And negative 45 plus a 6 is negative 39. So I actually have zeros equal to negative 39. In this case, that is not the case. That is not true. So in the end, I would say no solution. Remember that with elimination, once you do that step, you'd solve for the variable if you have one remaining, and then plug it in to find the other variable. Don't forget, occasionally you might have to multiply both equations by something. So keep an eye out for that as you work through this worksheet. All right, let's jump over to number 16, word problems. I'm not going to give you the template or the table to fill in, but if it helped you organize your thoughts, then maybe you do want to jot it down. So I'm going to sort of come up with a template. I know I'm going to have an X, a Y, and some totals. As I read through the problem to get an idea of what the problem means. We're talking about a coin bank that has 250 coins. We have dimes and quarters, and it's worth $39.25. How many of each type of coin are there? So the first thing I notice is the question. Each type of coin is the question. So therefore, X is going to be dimes, and I'm going to make my Y quarters. So now I want to identify all the numbers. I have 250. Dimes and quarters are numbers and worth $39.25. The 250 is definitely a total. That's my total coins. And the $39.25 is a total. That's my total worth. So if I was to label my rows, this would be coins and this would be worth. I don't know how many dimes I have, and I don't know how many quarters I have, but I know I have 250 coins altogether. I know I have to have an X and a Y in the next equation, so that's sort of an automatic assumption. But I'm talking about worth. Dimes worth. A dime's worth is 10 cents. A quarter's worth is 0.25, 25 cents. So we've got amount of coins and we have worth of coins. And now I need to solve. I'm going to choose elimination just because they're already lined up. And I'm going to start by multiplying my first equation. And I'm going to multiply it by negative 0.10. So if I distribute that negative 0.10, I have a negative 0.10x plus a negative 0.10y equals, now I'll need my calculator, so 250 times 0.10, which really all that means is I'm moving the decimal over once. So I end up with 25, but make sure you make that a negative. So the way I did this, my equations are actually already lined up, so let's draw a line underneath and do some old school adding. My x's cancel. I have 0.25 minus 0.10, or adding a negative, so I end up with 0.15y. I have a $39.25, and I'm adding on a negative 25 or subtracting a 25 to get me to $14.25. I want to get y by itself. Let's divide both sides by 0.15. And I end up with y equals 95. So let's see, my y represents quarters. So having 95 quarters makes sense. So let's solve the rest of the problem. My goal is to also find my my x value. So I'm going to use the first equation, but wherever there's a y, I'm going to put a gap. Wherever that gap is, I'm going to put that 95 that I found. No distributing, so that's nice. So I'm just going to subtract that 95 right over. So I now have x equals and 250, and we're going to minus that 95 to get 155. Remember with word problems, the label's your freebie. So let's label. I have 155 dimes and I have 95 quarters. Now let's double check that it makes sense for the context of the problem. Are 155 coins plus 95 coins 250 coins? Yeah, they are. And if I take 155 times it by the worth of 0.10 and I add on 0.25 times my 95, do I end up with 39.25? I do. On a test, if you have the time, it's so worth checking to make sure that your answer is right. Let's scoot over to the next section. We're going to solve a system of inequalities using graphing. We're going to go over to number 22 on the top right corner there. I first need to put these in graphable form. So if I look at this, I have y is less than 5. So that's good to go. But this second equation, I need to subtract 1 over to the other side first. I need to do that so that it's in y equals mx plus b form. All right, let's graph my first one. Y is less than 5. I got to go to the y-axis, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, up to 5. Should I draw a vertical or a horizontal line? Well, if I draw vertical, it doesn't make sense. It'd be the axis. So that reminds me that I need to be horizontal. And before I get going, I should make note that it needs to be dashed because it's just less than. I'm going to use my test point of 0, 0, which means I actually don't even need the x0, I just need the y0. So if I plug in 0, is 0 less than 5? Yes, it is. So that means I want to shade my true side, which is the 0, 0 side. Let's take a look at my second equation. I'm going to start at my y-intercept of -1. My slope is rise 2, run 1. Where you cross lines, make that dot a little bit bigger. You want to go both directions, and as always, fill up your graph. This says y is greater than, so again, I need another dashed line. In this case, I don't know if I want to use 0, 0 as my test point because my graph, maybe it's just because it's sloppy, is really close to 0, 0. So I'm actually going to use a test point. I'm going to use a test point way over here. I'm going to use -10, comma 0. So if I plug in 0 for y and -10 for x, I have a -20 minus 1, which is a -21. Is 0 greater than -21? Yes. So I'm going to shade that -10, 0 side. So now I'm interested in this double shaded area. We want to make that area stand out even more than the other shading. A little bit hard to see with my colors here, but this would be my solution, and I want you to label it just to make sure. So we're going to say solution. Okay, so again, make sure all your graphs are in y equals mx plus b form. Don't forget your shading, your dashed or solid lines, and show me your test point work. I want to see how you knew where to shade. All right, so our goals upon me returning, I will definitely want an excellent behavior report. I love it when subs brag about my classes, so let's make that happen. You want to finish the rest of this review worksheet. Because I am absent, I will post a key on Google Classroom. So that's a way you can check your answers. They won't show all the work, but it will show the answers. Make sure you study for the test tomorrow. We've been working on this section, you guys, for over a month. So you've had plenty of time to continue working. So study your notes, study old worksheets, study using this video as I'm going to post it on Google Classroom. Study, 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 and good luck tomorrow. We'll see you in a few days.